Welcome to Diversity. And in today's podcast, we have a difference. All these episodes, it was just me conversing with a leader, but today we have two of them. And I think more the merrier when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Very happy to bring you this episode of Diversity, brought to you by the Confederation of Indian Industry and Avatar, which has been powering workplace cultures for over 24 years. A very warm welcome to you, Ankit Jam, Chief Learning Officer, Grant Thornton Bharat, and to Sheetal Jared Sharma, Associate Director, People and Culture, Grant Thornton Bharat. So very wonderful to have both of you, in a departure to what we've been doing on the series. And I'm very excited about getting this diversity of perspectives on this podcast.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Thank you.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you, Sheetal. Ankit, I'm going to jump straight into, talking to you first and just expressing how amazing it is to see all of that which you have accomplished, including authoring so many books, Lost and Found at 35, Lights Please, Chasing Fireflies, the most negative book of positivity, and a few others. I'm going to start with that. The most negative book of positivity. How cool is that as a title? Could you please explain a little bit more about what exactly you were going for with that title and that whole theme?
Sure. I agree the title is very controversial and also very cool. It has a little story behind it. When I was writing the book, the publisher said that the book is all negative. You must write about something positive because I think India was riding the wave of positivity immediately after COVID. People were running for travel and they were buying stuff and they were doing revenge, passion, and they wanted to just live life because COVID had just struck. After the COVID had struck. So I felt that people have gone through emotions and people have gone through feelings which they haven't addressed. People have lost people. There is some stress, anxiety, fear. So that's how I embarked upon writing the book, where I said that these are elephants in the room and one must address it. The fundamental hypothesis or philosophy was that personalities and people are like houses. If the house is dirty, you don't decorate it. You first clean it. So thence the book was written. The book is based upon 30 destructive emotions which societies, people, communities don't talk or don't understand. So I simplified some 30 destructive emotions and called it the most negative book of positivity. Interestingly, the last chapter of the book is called positivity, which to me is the most negative word. And it's based upon the assumption that the human need to pursue more positive experience is the most negative thing. And hence the most negative book of positivity.
My God. That was truly mind-blowing. And for somebody who actually is a big evangelist of positivity, every morning I post on Twitter something called Kale Vanakkam, which means good morning in Tamil.
Yeah.
And the only thing I try to do in that post is to instill a little bit of positivity in people's lives. So this is super interesting to see a very different and a completely diverse take on the whole aspect of dealing with emotions.
Yeah.
And I completely buy the point that, being overly positive or relegating negative emotions to the background is definitely not a healthy thing to do.
Absolutely.
And yeah. And with that, I'm going to move to you, Sheetal. I just saw that among some of the awesome stuff that you do, there's the culture unfreezing sessions. And, you've talked about the fact that these culture unfreezing sessions are inspired by Peter Drucker's philosophy that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And, there couldn't be a more relevant a point in today's conversation than this, which is, how do you actually get the true culture of any organization to emerge? How do you unfreeze it? How do you get it to be alive and warm and walking about everywhere? So I just wanted to ask you, what do you mean by that? And what have you achieved through the culture unfreezing sessions?
So I think, so of course, Ankit is the one who spearheads culture for the firm. But fortunately, I've got an opportunity to be a part of the culture journey of Grant Thornton Bharat, which began in 2018. So it's been some time that we embarked on this culture journey. In GT, we call it G2. We used to call it G2G, which was good to great culture journey, which lasted for about 3.5 years. 2022, we said that all right, whatever we have thought of to achieve under as an umbrella of great, we have achieved that. What next now? So that's when our culture 2.0 journey started. We embarked on that, and that was called as great to exceptional. We were absolutely fortunate to be a part of this culture journey of the firm. When we say culture journey, it is primarily talking about the culture tenets, the culture and the values which the firm believes in. So we have something called as CARE values. We have our own set of core behaviors which the firm believes in. And CARE primarily here is not just an action, not just a verb. It is an acronym which stands for collaboration, authenticity, respect, responsibility, excellence. So it is an umbrella where we feel as an organization, we would want all our people from top to people down there to imbibe and to understand each and every value and culture tenet thoroughly. How to do that? This journey was brought into action through these culture unfreezing workshops, which were earlier held for the leadership, for the management of the firm. And then we started doing it for people across the board. So extremely excited, happy, and it is a great opportunity for us also to be a part of this journey to make it happen for people. We first got frozen with these values and these tenets, and then we ensured that we try and maximize this ripple effect and impact as many people we can in the organization. So it's a delight to be running these workshops.
No, absolutely. And the passion and energy that reverberates in your voice when you speak about it is ample evidence that not only have you enjoyed the process, I think the outcomes must have been very rich too. So when you take culture, and Ankit, I'm just asking your feedback on this. When you talk about culture, you have organizations that are, sort of segregated or classified according to the type of culture that they pursue.
Yeah.
So you could have a culture of excellence. You could have a culture of customer first. You could have, for instance, like you mentioned, a care culture, which is an acronym of all the points that you mentioned. Or you could have a culture of, something relating to, let's say, high performance, where you're talking about, very, very good performance delivered to your clients. Now, this is a thought that I've always kind of, mulled over, which is any culture has a certain sense of maturity. There is a maturity life cycle for any kind of culture. So when the organization is probably first started in its nascent years, the founders or the leaders, their culture gets percolated because it's a small team and everyone kind of, knows that this is what we value in our workplace. Over time, when the organization scales and grows and then more people join and you have for want of a better word, you have a cocktail of multiple values and opinions and views that come into the organization, then the original culture kind of probably undergoes a change, and you find that the whole team thing of forming, storming, norming, and performing, which tells you whether the culture is working or not, that then kind of comes into play. I just wanted to, in fact, the reason I wanted you to weigh in on this, Ankit, is because I saw that you have worked for PlanMan in your early days. And that must have been a fantastic organization experience, primarily because you would have learned so much in a setup where things were happening so quickly and so fast. and a lot of change was going on. And then, from there to Amex, to KPMG, to Grant Thornton, each organization would have instilled in you a very different perspective about, all things culture.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you, how do you see this, the entire study or the entire assessment of culture from a maturity standpoint? What would you say is the starting point and probably the end point of that journey?
No, what a wonderfully articulated question. Rather a predicament for anyone who is a part of any organization, any social system, or a social ecosystem. In the last 17, 18 years, I've belonged to 4 different cultures and 4 to 5 different cultures. And I felt that when people say that there is no culture, that is also culture. That's the fundamental point. Absence of culture is also culture. Or when we start equating culture to higher performances and productivity, that's when we start answering for the code or the puzzle of culture. If you remove everything from a team, there will be something left, and that will be anarchy or that will be mayhem, and that's going to become the culture. Ultimately, if you don't consciously draft out rules or casual or like I say, cause and effect for people, that if I display this behavior, then this happens in my life. If that cause and effect is not clear, then the culture is unconscious. Uh, Organizations are now focusing on consciously building cultures, telling people that these are set of behaviors which we would like to promote. This is the how of performance, which goes well with the what of performance. And that's what I've learned, that when organizations took a conscious call of figuring out what are the set of behaviors we would like to display, and then helped people shape an ecosystem and reinforce those and measure those, the progress was much easier. Trainings and solutions and workshops only play a little role in that. That's the second part. The third part also is that sometimes it's also about letting go of the obsessive need to control the culture so much that, if we've decided that these are 4 behaviors we have to display, now everyone must display. There also becomes a culture where behavior then becomes to a gun on my head, then I must. Then people start learn to fake it and rig it. So it's a delicate balance between allowing people to evolve themselves and also without pushing themselves into a culture. At the behest of this, Dr. Saundra, I feel that's my personal viewpoint, that belonging to a culture which is greater than you, building a culture which is larger than all of us in the organization, requires for personal sacrifices. And when I say personal sacrifices, these are sacrifices of your judgments, of your own prejudices, of your own eccentricities, of your own past baggages, of your own personal insecurities, and without which I don't think you can contribute. There's always this going to be an insecurity that, why should I become something? Why should I do something? Why should I be the one believe in assuming positive intent? Or why should I be mindful while in a conversation when the other person is using the mobile phone, or be more judgment? So that's your personal sacrifice. And for us, at least in our team and a larger culture where we've achieved certain milestones successfully, some of these culture behaviors have been ingrained into us. And when they're ingrained into you, you don't change as a professional. When I go back home, I'm the same person with my daughter. I'm constantly trying to be more mindful. I'm constantly trying to be more aware of my judgments. And that's one of the strongest pursuits of our culture journey. And we see that happening. It becomes, somewhere it's like a conscious battle you have to wage against your own self. There is this conditioned self, and then there is a conscious battle where I'm trying to become more aware of who I am and aligned to the core behaviors. And that's the beautiful journey people can go through. Yet, as we say, not everyone will achieve there. Even in a culturally aligned organization, there will be dysfunctional and culturally misaligned pockets. And sometimes that's healthy to bring back the balance. But in the last 17, 18 years, I've seen an organization consciously thought about behaviors, they did well. I've also seen when people addressed elephants in the room that we have a toxic culture, dysfunctional culture. We have a culture of not rewarding performances. Those organizations also did well when they addressed the problem. Where there is blind spot and like a black box, you don't know what's happening, then the culture which is unconscious is ruling people, and those are unsafe pockets for organizations.
Ankit, that was absolutely magnificent and such a wonderful mini masterclass on all things culture and why culture is really that most important factor in the success of an organization. I think you kind of really beautifully extrapolated on that whole thing. And Sheetal, I'm now going to come to you. And, I'm aware that you lead the diversity, equity, and inclusion part of culture, for Grant Thornton, among other things, for GT, among other things. And I want to really ask you, earlier on, this entire, set of work or actions that people take in creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture that was often perceived to be a big line item when it comes to spending.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, we don't have the budgets for DEI. I mean, I'm saying this because we are a DEI knowledge organization. And when we go to companies and we kind of, speak to them about programs or initiatives that they can do, the first thing that we would hear is, oh, we don't have budget for that. And I really wanted to understand from you, how do you think an organization can actually achieve that golden outcome of having a inclusive culture, a performance oriented inclusive culture, without it putting a huge strain on their finances? So any thoughts on that, Sheetal?
Yeah, so multiple things. I think we also, as an organization, for us, it's been almost 7 years that our DE&I journey at the firm began. So we began somewhere around 2017-18, and that's not too many years ago. Since our journey began, we also started slow. To be very honest, the perception was the same. Let's not spend too much, and let's look at starting small, and we did that. We started by when we talk about interventions, it was impossible for us to launch anything before or without letting people know what diversity, equity, inclusion actually means. Our people may not be able to differentiate also between what is diversity and what is inclusion. So that's where our journey began. So it was almost like an ABC, which we teach our students in nursery class. It was almost similar to that. We began our journey with that, creating awareness. It started by just simple release of communications in a format which is more readable, more acceptable by people. We started using platforms which are more user friendly. So it was not just sending out emailers on emails. We used a couple of other platforms which we use internally. We have a Viva Engage, we have a WhatsApp platform which we use for our people. Of course, social media did a little bit of jig there as well. So we started by simple communication releases which were more engaging. So there were GIFs, there were communications which were linked to, let's say, a quiz which wanted people to be more interactive. Those interactive communications ensured that people read something and attempted let's say an interactive based quiz to just reinforce their learning. That's how the journey began. Of course, zero cost. There was no cost per se inputted because everything we created, we did in-house. That was the attempt, that let's look at building a team internally who are like SMEs on the theme of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Over the, let's say, after 2-3 years, we started building it up. We started translating this into interesting e-learn modules. How we elevated the experience for our people was we started gamifying the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion to reach out to the masses. So we, of course, understood that, just doing, let's say, a workshop and preaching people about what is, let's say, unconscious biases, what is inclusive work culture, how is it different from, let's say, exclusive, non-inclusive, or how is an equity as a concept different from inclusion. All of that was told and primarily taught to people through gamified formats. Couple of things which we did there was we launched a gamified platform which was created in-house, taking our tech support. The gamified platform had a series of activities, learning-based interventions, which taught or spoke about concepts which were around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So there was a jumble puzzle, there was a crossword, There was a word search, which primarily just gave hints and got people to talk about these concepts in a gamified format. We kind of took it one step ahead after a couple of years, which is last year only, where we launched our own DE&I toolkit. The toolkit was a physical toolkit per se, where we took that initiative to customize and reimagine our childhood games and align them to the theme of DE&I. So, we have a dartboard which is called Bias Busters, which just talks about different positive and negative behaviors which we want people to focus on. We adapted the childhood monopoly and we called it Behavior Poly and launched it in the form of a physical board game, which people could just come together in teams and play. Spoke about what are different inclusive, non-inclusive behaviors and how those behaviors linked them to play that particular board game. There was a card game as well. So there was an adaptation of cards and Uno, which we kind of created on the same theme. There was a similar adaptation of Tambola, which we called as DE&I Bingo. So all of these 6-7 games were conceptualized with the intent that let's create something which is more long-term, more sustainable, and of course, didn't impact the cost element as well. So it was all placed. So now each of our offices have at least, 4 to 5 toolkits, whatever interventions we do, whatever sessions we do, workshops we do, team connects we do, we encourage people to use those at least in one segment of, let's say, 15 to 20 minutes. So that just reinforces the concepts of DE&I in a gamified format, and the message somehow reaches and stays with people as they get that rolling within their teams.
Very nice, very nice. And wonderful usage of, like you said, low cost, initiatives which would help people get engaged with the basic theme of what DEI really means. Now, just like we spoke about maturity in culture, there is maturity in organizations that pursue DEI as well.
Absolutely.
And this question, Ankit, is to you. When you start looking at, DEI maturity in companies, which means, they are beyond the awareness stage, they have gotten into probably action, they're looking at maybe transformation both within the organization and outside, and how they can begin, creating results or impact in probably a larger community, either a community of, people who could be potential talent sources for the organization, or could probably just be a CSR initiative where you use the concepts of DEI to create that impression, to make that impression. To what extent do you think technology actually plays a role in this? Do you think technology can, especially with AI being what it is, do you think technology can actually support the building of a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture? Or do you think it can at best be a reliable aid, but it cannot go, beyond that? What are your thoughts on this, Ankit?
So, a short answer to that is tech definitely has the ability to help organizations build a more inclusive environment. But tech alone can't do it. What we have to realize is tech is not a replacement of change in behavior and mindset. Tech could be an enabler, a choice architecture, an environment around me, my laptop having assistive touch and accessibility tools could remind me that there could be someone who's different than me, could remind me, okay, this has been made for somebody who is visually impaired. But if I step out of my laptop and I treat the same person with the same eccentricity, then we're not doing justice.
Yeah.
That safety, that psychological safety, that the right to exist and breathe the same air in all terms of humanity, that tech won't be able to solve. Tech is able to enable you, answer for neurodivergency, their answer for skills divergency, answer for multi-generational diversity. Tech is able to create a choice architecture of sorts. Okay, it's not able to answer for emotional safety. Tech wasn't judging me when I was making mistake because of my neurodivergence. So tech is not the culprit in this case. People were judging me. So those behaviors have to continue to evolve to a point where at least a very strong role signal the brain learns that it's not all right to mock, it's not all right to display microaggression. I got to be aware of my judgments. I got to be aware of my prejudices, and skilling programs do that. But you realize I have a philosophy that if top 10% or 5% of the organization of the leadership falls in right, then the rest will fall right. I believe in the snowball domino effect. I believe in the butterfly effect. If we get that part right, then you see the pattern changing across. If you don't get that part right and you continue to invest 80% of your effort somewhere else, you will only get 20%. So tech is the answer. All the assistive technologies, wearable technologies, all of them are the answer. They hold relevance, but they can't be seen as the single point or a magic wand to create an environment. Let me also show you the dark side. The tech industry itself is suffering with inclusivity issues. Uh, there is massive research around the fact that how stereotypes and biases believe that all coders are men. There's in fact interesting TED Talks where a female coder says that most of them they felt for a shock when I said that I code. So tech itself is struggling with a diversity and inclusivity issue. So you realize every product they create will also have an element of bias into it. So is
Yes.
the AI to a point where it's bias free? I don't think so right now, because the creators of AI at this point of time have a default bias, which is a very strong gender bias. Now, imagine a world where something is created by a neurodivergent who has the skills. His worldview or her worldview would be very different from when I create a product of tech. When an LGBTQI community participates in the coding, programming, Scrum, or Agile war room, their contribution will bring their worldview. And when that starts to happen, you realize then we get to a product which is bias free. Where our tech is right now not bias free. So it has its own limitation, but it's not a replacement to behavioral change.
Excellent. Thank you. Very well said. Sheetal, question to you. I'm sure Grant Thornton, being a consulting company which also looks at, transformation at various levels of businesses, what are your thoughts about, inclusion being implemented in small businesses? How do you think that's likely to happen? And what are the maybe top 3 points or top 2 points on how that can really take place?
See, when you need to implement that from a small business standpoint, like we earlier said, we need to go slow. A lot of times, it is about starting from the basics. It is usually helpful to start telling people about the concepts from the base level. Let them, start slow. Let them start reading about things. Let them start reading across through various communications, like I told you. Let them know how what this is and how this will impact the business altogether. A lot of times we've felt that when we talk about small businesses, it is not just about making them aware about what the concept is. It is also important to tell them how it will impact them at base level. So that is definitely critical. Let's say looking at scaling up, let's say looking at bringing somebody who takes ownership of implementing that within that business is also important. So let's bring one person who's like that change ambassador who implements that in that organization for that business. That's again critical. The third thing which is very important is not just to have an ambassador, but to have a network of allies who believe in that concept and look at promoting that amongst the larger group. You cannot have just one change ambassador drive the E&I as an agenda for the entire business or the organization, how big or small it is. You will have to have a network of followers, allies who believe in the concept and will be your extended arms to run it all through. So I think these would be my top 3, that, you start creating awareness, you have one change ambassador who leads it, and third, you build a network of allies who are there to follow you and eventually lead at the forefront.
Excellent. I think we are almost at the end of this podcast, and I have some rapid fire questions for the two of you. So let me begin, with Ankit's. So, question to you.
Yes.
What's your favorite work of fiction?
Uh, I'm horrible at rapid fire this minute. The Immortals of Maluha by Amish Tripathi.
Wow. Oh, very nice. Great book. Your go-to hack to overcome writer's block, especially since you're an author of several books.
Anytime I think I can't write because I have a mental block, I write about I can't write because I have a mental block. And that actually helps.
Fabulous. Your leadership style,
Can I say this in Hindi?
of course.
In my head, I keep telling myself that खुद जियो और औरों को भी जीने दो.
Oh,
And he follows that.
absolutely. Which is, I think, the essence of empathy
Yeah.
and the essence of inclusiveness. So
Correct.
beautiful. Live and let live. Okay. Sheetal, questions for you. A very common misconception about DEI.
So I think very common one is that people feel DE&I is only for women as a gender, but which is not true. It is for all genders. So it is definitely not for women. That's a very common misconception.
Okay. An advice you wish you got as an 18-year-old?
I would have wished my parents and extended family would have advised me that, and that's also one of the regrets I have, that, it's okay to begin and get into an alternative career option. That point in time when I started, it was just about either you do become a doctor, you become an engineer, or you pursue an MBA. And I went with that, the third option. I would have loved if somebody would have advised me to, that we are there, just go follow your passion and go ahead and pick up an alternative career option for yourself.
Fantastic. Your favorite inclusion theme related movie?
Movie. So I think so. There's this movie called Wonder. It's based on a novel, and it's about a boy, Augie, who's suffering from Treacher-Collins syndrome, which leads to the facial disorder. And the movie is about how he gets, he takes admission in a school, and faces challenges being accepted by people, not just his friends, but also teachers. So the entire was about his struggle and how beautifully he ensures that he is accepted eventually in the schools. I love that movie. I related to inclusion very, very.
Oh, fabulous. This has been such a gorgeous conversation. And Ankit, both you and Sheetal, your sharing has been so enriching. And I'm sure our podcast viewers are absolutely going to enjoy watching this particular episode.
Thank you.
So with that, I'm just going to say a big thanks to the two of you
Thank you.
for having taken time out and being part of this, episode of diversity.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Sandhya.
And, to our viewers, I hope you all enjoyed that vibrant exchange of thoughts and that wonderful conversation. I wish we had more time, where we heard about all things culture, all things DEI, from a very practical, implementable standpoint of just imagining a world that is diverse, equitable, inclusive, and doing everything that you can to actually see that manifest. So stay tuned for newer episodes on diversity. Thank you.